Hey guys, welcome back to Fragments of Faith. Before we get started, if you guys could like share, subscribe, comment, like all the fun podcast stuff. I know it's kind of annoying, but it helps more than it should, and we really appreciate it. By the way, seriously, thank you guys for being here. This is our first real episode.
Yeah, that pilot episode was really just a lot of who we are and why we're doing this.
Yeah, this is the first time that Thomas and I are actually going to be digging into a topic.
So when Whitney and I first talked about doing this podcast, one of the topics that kept coming up was prayer.
Yeah, because prayer's complicated right now. Not really like in a theoretical way.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I don't want to talk about what prayer means. I want to talk about what actually happened when we prayed because it's not what prayer means to me. It's more like what we did and what didn't happen. So sometimes people assume that unanswered prayer means that you were taking it casually, you weren't taking it seriously, that you were like praying occasionally or treating it as like an optional thing, but that was not us. um, we were very invested. We believed that prayer moved things, changed things. And when Riley was declining, we did not have a diagnosis yet. We went to a healing prayer conference and we didn't walk in there as skeptics. I mean, we didn't go in there like, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. I mean, we were locked in because I believed prayer worked. I I knew that God would intervene. So people lined up. They had very intentional prayers over my child. They laid hands on my kids. And it wasn't like a symbolic thing. Like this was very deliberate. I mean, we were there believing with all of our hearts that prayer was going to fix whatever was going on with Riley. Um And then after, we were also given a very specific prayer to pray over our children. And we prayed this every night, the exact words. And it was mostly a prayer for if you don't pray specifically, um, you know, God, let me win the lottery and you win a $15 scratch off ticket. You should have been more, I don't know, intentional. You should have been more specific with what you were asking for. So we would pray over her nervous system, over her cardiac system, over her brain, over her body, over her muscles. And we did it every night religiously. The same words, the same intention, the same belief. We did see some improvement and that bolstered our faith. Obviously, it's oh my gosh, it's working. Like we have the faith of a mustard seed, right? And we prayed every night. We had a pastor come to the house and pray. He walked room to room and he did prayers in each of the rooms, um, prayers of protection, prayers of healing. We even had another pastor come in and actually anoint the house with prayer, um, oil on the doors and everything, using scripture and prayer, like the whole thing. I mean, we had people praying for my kids in person. There were people praying states and countries over. I mean, churches prayed, groups of people prayed, individuals prayed. We did everything that we were told to do. And I'm not saying this to be bitter. I'm saying this because it matters. My kids still died. I prayed and I had faith that it would change something. And one night, my sister and I are like we're just helping Riley. She's not breathing very well. And it was very clear that she was in pain. And my sister and I held hands and we prayed over her. God, please just give her a moment of peace. Give her a moment of freedom from the pain that she's experiencing right now. And nothing happened. I felt betrayed and It wasn't just a loss of my kids, like, I also felt a loss of trust with God that I had put so much faith into. And so people, I feel like they don't really talk about prayer unless they have like a great testimony, you know? I mean, prayer is awesome when it works, when you have a cool story that's like, no, I prayed and this happened. We were showing up, we were submitting to God, we were inviting people in and believing like fully. And the outcome was still the exact thing that we prayed against. A lot of people told me, well, I mean, it's God's will, you know, it's God's timing, it's God's plan. Those, those phrases are not comforting when you are sitting in a funeral home and you have prayed for your child to live and now you get to take them home in a little urn. I guess people just don't account for the fact that we put in effort. Like we were obedient. We were all like, I don't need prayer to be a vending machine. Okay. I'm not just saying that like you should treat God as something that you talk to only when you need something. But I wasn't asking for just anything. I was asking for him to spare my children's lives. So I was taught that prayer is powerful, that prayer and belief could move mountains. So I didn't just lose my children, I also lost a huge chunk of my faith. Because what's the point in prayer if it's not going to do anything, right? So then you become uncertain in your faith, and you're like, well, I don't. At some point, I even question, like, well, is there anybody on the other end of that line, that phone line? Like, I'm making calls and maybe they're not going through. I don't know. So yes, I'm very angry because people do love prayer in theory when it produces stories, like when it works in real time. I guess you know. But I'm not there. I'm not. I'm not. I don't know if I'm going to be there. Like just stuck on the fact that we prayed like we were told to. We prayed and followed everything that we were told to do. I mean, we even got rid of like figurines in our house. I don't know where that came from or who told us that, but I mean, we even tossed out owls and frogs. I don't know why. I don't remember what it was, but I just remembered like that's part of believing and being obedient. And so I did it fully, and nothing changed. So I guess that's where I'm sitting right now. Is I don't think that prayer is something worthwhile, or has any kind of value just personally.
I want to be really careful here because my role as a pastor gives me a microphone that can do harm if I'm not paying attention. So I'm not going to try to explain this. I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to theologize over what you just shared.
I appreciate that.
I, I think you know me from our conversations. That's not really the way I go about handling things.
That's why I could talk to you about this stuff.
What you described isn't a failure of effort. It's not a lack of faith. It's not someone who prayed and hoped for the best. You did everything that you were told faithfulness looks like. And that matters. That does matter. One of the most damaging things the church has done around prayer is pretend that effort doesn't count. That obedience doesn't count, that belief doesn't count. But it does. When people rush to phrases like God's will or God's timing
Yeah.
without first acknowledging what you carried, what you practiced, what you entrusted with God every single night, those phrases don't heal, they wound. They don't make it better, they make it worse because they skip the cost. They skip the discipline of prayer. They skip the repetition, the hope practiced over and over again. They skip the vulnerability of opening yourself up night after night to the possibility of a miracle and trusting God with what mattered most. So when the outcome is the very thing you were praying against, it doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes the whole framework. Scripture actually knows that space, even if we don't like to admit it. There is a prayer in the Bible in Psalm chapter 22 that always unsettles people. It starts with words that we usually associate with Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? But if you keep reading, something important happens. The psalmist doesn't just cry out. He lists his effort. He reminds God of his past faithfulness. He says, others trusted you and were delivered. In other words, this isn't the prayer of someone who barely tried. This is someone who knew God, someone with history, someone doing everything he knows how to do and still feeling abandoned. And what's striking is that the psalm doesn't resolve neatly. It's kind of like our podcast. We're not looking for answers. Like there's no moment in the 22nd Psalm where God steps in and explains himself. There's no correction. There's no tidy ending. There's no tying it up with a bow. The prayer exists in Scripture exactly as it is. Faithful, angry, unanswered, at least in the moment. There's another place in Scripture that helps me name this honestly too. Paul talks in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 about something he desperately wants taken away. He says he has a thorn in his flesh. And he says he prayed 3 times specifically for it to be removed, and it wasn't. Which tells me something that we don't say out loud enough. Even the most faithful prayers don't always change the outcome. Sometimes prayer changes the conversation. Sometimes it changes the person praying. And sometimes it doesn't change anything we can see at all. And that doesn't make prayer pointless, but it does mean we have to stop pretending that effort guarantees results. So when you say you didn't just lose your children, but you lost your understanding of prayer, I don't hear that as abandoning faith. Okay, I think if that's where you were, you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. I hear it as standing in a place Scripture already knows. I also want to say this clearly, especially as a pastor. Losing your understanding of prayer after something like this is not spiritual failure. It's an honest response to shattered expectations. Anger does not disqualify grief, and grief does not disqualify faith. You can be angry and still be telling the truth. You can be angry and still be in relationship with God. You can be angry and still be faithful. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is refuse to lie about how we actually feel. So I don't hear what you shared as rebellion. I hear someone who trusted deeply and is now living with the cost of that trust. And I don't want to move past that too quickly. I want to stay here with you in it, because if prayer is still a question for you right now, I don't think that means you're doing faith wrong. I think it means you're being honest about what faith looks like after loss. And I want to ask you something, not as a pastor trying to steer this, but as someone sitting across from you in this space. When you think about prayer now, not what it's supposed to be, not what you were taught it would do, what does it actually feel like to you? Is it something you still reach for? Is it something you avoid? Something you're angry at? Something you don't have language for yet? Because I don't think the most important part of this conversation is landing on a resolution. I think it's staying honest about where prayer lives for you right now, even if that place is uncertain or unfinished or still raw. So I don't want to answer this for you. I want to hear how you're carrying it.
When you first asked, what does it actually feel like to you? Like the word that kind of pops into my head is pointless, and I don't want to be cynical, but I, I feel like it's pointless if it didn't work. Like it feels like the connection is has been severed. Um, if I didn't get an answer on the big stuff, if I didn't get help with the big stuff, like I, I don't know, maybe it's like why waste time on the little stuff? I feel very betrayed, let down, angry. There's a lot of anger. I guess I guess there's really it's more than something I have language for at this point.
That makes that makes perfect sense. That makes sense to me. If if prayer was something you practiced faithfully and specifically and with real hope, and it still didn't change what mattered most, then calling it pointless, it isn't cynicism. It sounds like honesty. Um, when effort doesn't lead to outcome, most of us eventually stop pouring energy into the thing that keeps reopening the wound. That feels less like walking away from God and more like self protection. I'm curious about something, and you don't have to have this figured out, but when you say prayer feels pointless, does it feel pointless because nothing happens or because praying itself now costs you more than you can afford emotionally?
Or I would say both. I mean, obviously I feel like it's pointless because nothing happened, but also now I feel like if I opened back up to prayer, it would cost me more than I can afford emotionally. There's not it's a very it's a very big it's not just like a wound, I guess. It's like a sucking chest wound, really, of like, why why didn't anything happen? And it's interesting that you bring up Psalms. I I have not heard that prayer. And I guess I never really understood like that other people felt like that in the Bible, even though they're supposed to be super close to God. So I don't know. Now I'm questioning everything.
Well, and that was that was just two examples. We have Jesus himself who prayed literally from the cross. If this cup can pass from me, but then he goes on to say, but not my will, but yours. Because for us as believers, he had to go through that. Okay. So his prayer, even that prayer, let this cup pass from me, even that prayer went unanswered the way he would have wanted it. So I don't, again, I don't think this is cynicism. I don't think you thinking it's pointless. It is. I think that's just honesty. Um, one last question though: when you stopped praying, Did it feel like relief? Did it feel like loss? Was it a mix of both?
Uh, that's a really good question. Um, I I guess I've never really considered either of those options. I mean, sort of a relief, sort of a loss because I was, doing it so faithfully so often. I guess it also kind of feels a little bit like revenge. You were silent, so I'm not gonna talk to you. You know, I guess I don't really have an answer for that, but I think that's something that we need to keep talking about because I don't really know what I feel with the loss of prayer in my life.
Yeah, we don't want to pretend prayer is simple. We don't want to pretend that faith always survives loss intact. So maybe the most honest way to end this episode isn't with a statement, but with a question. What is what does prayer become after it doesn't save what you were praying for? We don't have an answer to that yet.
But we're willing to keep asking it together.